Smoke is seen rising near Beirut airport as Israeli airstrikes continue. Lebanon's interior minister says the number of displaced people in Beirut is the largest it's been. And the US State Department says that the United States does not want the situation in Lebanon to escalate like in Gaza. It's 4 p.m. Cairo local time and you're watching Q News. We're going to start our bulletin today with the latest developments in Lebanon.
كل المستهدفين هن مدنيين.
وضع شيء مرعب، شيء بخوف.
Smoke has been seen rising near Beirut airport as Israel continues to launch strikes across Lebanon. Lebanon's crisis response unit has announced that 22 people were killed and 80 were wounded in the past 24 hours. That came after 3 Israeli occupation forces raided Beirut's southern suburbs, targeting around Al Rayah Stadium and Harat Hareik municipality. The death toll in Lebanon from the ongoing Israeli attacks has risen to more than 2,100 since October 2023. This is accompanied by more than 10,000 others injured. Lebanon has suffered more than 9,000 Israeli attacks since the outbreak of the Israel-Hezbollah conflict on October 8th last year. The Lebanese government has established 1,000 shelters to accommodate the displaced, with 807 of them being full. Currently, some 180,000 people are displaced and residing in official shelters. Lebanon's Interior Minister Bassam Maulawi has said that the number of displaced people in Beirut due to the Israeli aggression is the largest of its kind. Maulawi added at a press conference that the security forces are in the capital and that they are now being strengthened. Maulawi called for the need for additional shelters for the displaced in Beirut. The Lebanese Minister of the Interior added that procedures coordinated with Lebanese security agencies and intensified work to secure Beirut's airport are ongoing. The Israeli occupation forces have claimed strikes followed by explosions of Hezbollah weapon storage facilities in Lebanon. That came after Israel's aggression on Lebanon that has been ongoing for more than 10 days now, following almost a year of cross-border fire exchange between Israel and Hezbollah. Ground clashes between Israeli occupation forces and Hezbollah spread along southern Lebanon's mountainous frontier as the Middle East is on high alert. Israeli occupation forces' airstrikes on Lebanon have intensified, displacing 1.2 million people, killing over 2,000, and severely damaging Beirut's infrastructure, raising humanitarian concerns. Here's our report.
Israeli media and government statements have asserted that Israeli forces are targeting Hezbollah's military infrastructure in Lebanon. The broader objective of these strikes appears to be the destruction of Lebanon's infrastructure. These developments align with initial comments from the United States at the onset of Israel's ground offensive in Lebanon. Israeli occupation forces have reportedly struck over 2,000 Hezbollah-related targets, including military facilities and tunnels. U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin and Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant emphasized the necessity of dismantling Hezbollah's offensive capabilities while reaffirming Israel's right to self-defense. In contrast, Lebanese officials have raised alarms about the severe humanitarian consequences of these military actions. Caretaker Minister of Information Ziad al-Makkari revealed that approximately 1.2 million people have been displaced, exacerbating an already fragile economic and infrastructural situation. The toll includes over 2,000 fatalities and more than 10,000 injuries. Beirut's governor, Marwan Aboud, reported significant damage to buildings and infrastructure in the capital that has drastically altered the city's landscape. He noted that schools are currently housing displaced families, disrupting the academic year, and the local trade has halted. Streets and fields are crowded with displaced people as the city's crisis further compounds.
Israel's relentless attacks on Lebanon have been threatening the operations of healthcare facilities. These attacks forced a number of hospitals in southern Lebanon to cease functioning, while people who didn't evacuate from the area are struggling amid a barrage of missile strikes. The 4 hospitals which remain open in Tyre are less crowded than expected due to the mass exodus of residents, but are still facing the challenges of dealing with trauma patients from the attacks. The United States State Department has announced that the United States does not want the situation in Lebanon to escalate like it has in Gaza, emphasizing that only the Lebanese people can determine the makeup of their government.
First of all, let me say we cannot and must not see the situation in Lebanon turn into anything like the situation in Gaza. That would, of course, not be acceptable. And ultimately, it is as I said in response to an earlier question, it is up to the Lebanese people, not anybody else, to decide on who their government is.
The United Nations Special Coordinator for Lebanon, Janine Hennis-Plasschaert, has said that a United States and French-led call for a 21-day truce between Israel and Hezbollah is still on the table. She pushed for a way to enforce a UN Security Council resolution that has been violated for years. She also called for a realistic roadmap for the implementation by both sides of Resolution 1701. The first of over 2,000 evacuees in Beirut have boarded a Turkish military ship to evacuate from Lebanon. The ship is part of a 6-ship convoy, including escorts that set sail from the southern Turkish port of Mersin. The convoy transported 300 tons of humanitarian supplies, including food, hygiene kits, kitchenware, tents, beds, and blankets. Israeli aggression on Lebanon continues, where 22 were killed and 80 injured in only the past 24 hours. Now, for more on this, we can cross over to our newsroom where Selma is there. Selma.
Thank you, Mark. For further analysis on the escalating tensions in Lebanon and the Middle East, joining us from Beirut is the writer and political researcher Alexander Khashashu. Mr. Alexander, welcome to Qnews. We're glad to have you with us to know your inputs in the matter. Let me first ask you, why has Israel changed its stance regarding a ceasefire in Lebanon, linking it to reaching an agreement in Gaza, despite previous attempts to separate what's happening on the Lebanese border from what's happening in Gaza?
Israel is trying to practice pressure in every way possible to implement what they claim as a win in front of Hezbollah in Lebanon. They try to benefit from this in Gaza. This is not logical. This is not acceptable. They raise the limit. They raise their demands, the limit of their demands and their conditions. So no one would practice pressure on it to stop the war. There is a decision made to continue war in Lebanon as in Gaza. They ask for unlogical conditions to link both fronts to each other. In return, at the beginning, they were practicing pressure to separate both fronts from each other. This is not logical. This is not acceptable. I think these are only justifications to continue war in Lebanon.
So, in light of the upcoming UN Security Council session to take place today, what are your thoughts on it and the possibility of the Council finding any solution to the current crisis in Lebanon and Gaza?
ممكن تعيدي السؤال بالعربي؟ أنا ما سمعته.
Yes, of course. So, in light of the upcoming UN Security Council session, what are your thoughts on it and what's the possibility of the Council finding any solution to the current crisis in Lebanon and Gaza?
لا أعتقد أن هناك رابط
I don't believe that they will link both Lebanon and Gaza in the Security Council, and there are international demands to separate Gaza's front from Lebanon's front, and linking both fronts to each other is totally inaccurate. Both matters will be discussed separately. Each front has its complicated situation, each front has its special matters, so linking both together will affect the cease of the war in both fronts.
Now, looking at the wider picture, Mr. Alexander, is it possible to reach a comprehensive ceasefire in Lebanon and Gaza soon, or does the situation still have much to unfold?
Up till now, I don't believe that this is put on the table. It's not suggested up till now. Israel is manipulating and practicing maneuvers. They are raising the limits of their conditions as if they are demanding another chance to continue war in Lebanon and Gaza at the same time. I think there is wasted time in order to reach the presidential elections in the United States of America. Benjamin Netanyahu wants to seize all this time to continue the war in Gaza, and what's being conducted now is the exploitation of the wasted time. The front is still open and the war is still continuous, at least until the presidential elections in the United States. Until now, there are no serious international conversations that discuss the end of the war. All what we hear is just talking. Up till now, everything that is being said regarding the negotiations and the experience, all of them were refused by Benjamin Netanyahu during this year. Benjamin Netanyahu wants to reach a certain limit, and I think he's fully prepared for this.
That was the writer and political researcher Alexander Khashashu. Thank you so much for your fruitful insights. Now we're going to move back to Mark for more news and developments around the world. Back to you, Mark.
Thank you very much, Salma. Now let's get the latest developments in Gaza. At least 28 civilians have been killed and 54 were injured in an Israeli bombing of a school housing displaced people west of the Palestinian side of Rafah. Israeli occupation forces continue their aggression on the Gaza Strip by land, sea and air since October 7, 2023. That came as the Palestinian Ministry of Foreign Affairs condemned the crimes of genocide and displacement committed by the Israeli occupation forces in the Gaza Strip in general and in the north in particular. At least 55 Palestinians have been killed and 166 others injured in Israeli attacks in the last 24 hours. Palestinian medical sources reported that Palestinian death toll from Israeli aggression against the Gaza Strip has now surged to more than 42,000 and more than 97,000 others injured. Local media sources have reported that the Israeli occupation forces withdrew from Al-Farah camp south of Tubas after storming the camp for about 10 continuous hours. Israel raided several homes, committed violations against ambulance crews, detained a number of citizens and caused extensive destruction to infrastructure and citizens' property. For the fifth consecutive day, Palestinian civilians in Jabalia camp in northern Gaza have been facing genocide. Israeli occupation forces imposed a land blockade, carried out killings, blew up homes and forced displacement. Local media sources stated that civilians refused to be displaced to the south despite intense pressure and threats. The UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has made a strong appeal for an immediate ceasefire both in Gaza and Lebanon.
Every airstrike, every missile launch, every rocket fired pushes peace further out of reach and makes the suffering even worse for the millions of civilians caught in the middle. That is why we cannot and will not give up on our calls for an immediate ceasefire both in Gaza and Lebanon, the immediate and unconditional release of hostages, and the immediate life-saving aid to all those who desperately need it. And that is why we cannot and will not give up on our calls for irreversible action for a two-state solution between Israel and Palestine.
Meanwhile, China's permanent representative to the UN, Fu Kong, has called for Israel to cease military actions in Gaza, lift the blockade and allow humanitarian access. He also criticized Israeli disregard for international humanitarian law. He condemned Israel's intensified operations in the West Bank, which threaten the two-state solution. Fu also warned against escalating tensions in Lebanon, urging all parties to seek a ceasefire, while also emphasizing the need to address the diminishing authority of the Security Council in conflict resolution. The United States Ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, has called on Israel to urgently address the catastrophic conditions in the besieged Gaza Strip.
These catastrophic conditions were predicted months ago and yet have still not been addressed. That must change, and now. We call on Israel to take urgent steps to do so. And I reiterate the United States' expectation that Palestinian civilians, including those evacuated from the north, be permitted to return to their communities and rebuild. Consistent with Resolution 2735, there must be no demographic or territorial change in the Gaza Strip, including any actions that reduce the territory of Gaza.
The Kremlin has stated that it has received no sign from Ukraine that it is ready for a ceasefire. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said regarding published reports about ceasefire plans that he assured that Moscow had not received any concrete signs from Kyiv. Russia has claimed it attacked several Ukrainian military equipment facilities. That comes as Ukraine engages in dozens of combat battles with Russian forces on the front lines. The Russian Defense Ministry said that Russian troops have now regained control over the settlements of Novaya Sorinchina and Pokrovsky in Russia's Kursk Oblast. A Russian early morning attack on Zaporizhia has hit civilian infrastructure and injured civilians. The regional governor, Ivan Fedorov, said that a flurry of Russian-guided bomb strikes injured 6 people, including a 17-year-old girl, and damaged 29 buildings in the southeastern city. Well, that's all for this bulletin, but let's have a look at those headlines. Smoke is seen rising near Beirut airport as Israeli airstrikes continue. Lebanon's interior minister says the number of displaced people in Beirut is the largest it's been. And the U.S. State Department has said that the United States does not want the situation in Lebanon to escalate like in Gaza.
That would, of course, not be acceptable.
Well, that's all for now. Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to follow Qnews on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok. You can find us at QNewsEGY. And for real-time updates, you can connect with us on the UMS digital platform Watch It. Stay tuned. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.